Today, we honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Many Americans, especially those born after Dr. King's assassination 50 years ago, see him only in the oversimplified terms of race. This is unfortunate. Becoming an icon tends to remove a person's scars and imperfections, when in fact it is the scars and imperfections out of which human authenticity and memorable public lives emerge. Moreover, reducing the Martin Luther King story to one of race alone ignores the deeper issues he struggled with and spoke to. What it means to be civilized, how one confronts evil without creating more evil, division, and enmity, the industrial-military complex, class, and the proper role of religion in politics. In an era of political violence, fake news, vitriol-fueled attack ads, and highly orchestrated spin control, we are wise to remember what King told the Freedom Riders in 1960. Our ultimate end must be the creation of the beloved community. Martin King's public life and public ministry began in September 1954 when he was called to the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. In short order, Rosa Parks was jailed for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white person. The 25-year-old King was elected chair of a group calling for a boycott of public transit, a boycott that ended up lasting 382 days. The situation became so tense that Reverend King's house was bombed. King was vilified and arrested, and yet throughout he practiced and extolled nonviolence. In the end, the U.S. Supreme Court outlawed racial segregation on all public transit. In 1964, as a result of these efforts, Martin Luther King became the youngest person to win the Nobel Peace Prize. By that time, however, Dr. King was focusing on economic justice issues. Then, in 1967, he began to speak out against the Vietnam War, and within a year, he was dead. At the time of his murder, Martin Luther King was perhaps the most dangerous man in America, the one public figure, much revered, who could potentially unify in his person and through the power of his moral authority the civil rights, labor, and anti-war movements. It was not to be. He did not leave us unified. What he did leave us with, however, was a dream. He never entered the promised land, but he saw it, and he wrote elegantly about what it looked like. And the name of that land he called Beloved Community. I've entitled today's sermon, Have We a Dream Too? I have a dream. And as the person asked by you to lead your congregation for a short time, I want to share that dream with you this morning. A dream strongly influenced by Martin Luther King and by our Unitarian Universalist tradition. I've been impressed since returning to California 8.5 years ago at the many Unitarian Universalists I have met who speak of their congregations as beloved communities. One California UU I was talking to, a humanist and an agnostic, told me that beloved community was her concept of the sacred or holy. She recognized that she was talking about an ideal, something congregations strive to attain, a transcendent symbol that has evocative power to rally our spirits and energies to the cause of justice, celebration, healing, education, uplift, and support. The UUCIL Stewardship Council, meeting 8 days ago, selected Beloved Community as their theme for this year's soon-to-begin Canvas and fundraising campaign. Beloved Community includes humanists and theists, as well as others of different theological persuasions, pagans, transcendentalists, Saul Alinsky-type community activism, medievalists, I suppose, syndical anarchists. They're all part of Beloved Community. Beloved Community is sort of our highest common denominator, and hence an apt symbol for UUs and for people everywhere, one that can inspire hope and courage to reach out and to change. Beloved Community. It is curious that in his writings, Dr. King, coming out of the Baptist tradition, did not use the traditional Christian language, kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven, or mystical body of Christ. Instead, he wrote of beloved community. The thing is, King was more of a humanist than many people realize. Of the men who most influenced his thinking, one was Mahatma Gandhi, a devout Hindu. Christ furnished the spirit, wrote King, while Gandhi furnished the method. Another seminal influence on King was the humanist Erich Fromm, whose book, The Art of Loving, was the source of today's opening words. Fromm provided the intellectual framework for King's spiritual recognition of love as a divine force, uniting and unifying all life. Healthy congregational life is about more than meeting our personal, spiritual, and emotional needs. Though that will undoubtedly follow, it cannot be the church's raison d'etre. It's not that achieving one's personal goals is not worthwhile. It is. It's just that it will never galvanize the kind of passion and commitment that transforms lives. And through those lives, communities, and even nations. And that's my dream, transformation. The primary purpose of the church, writes Unitarian Universalist consultant Michael Duvall, is to create a community of compassion, calling members to lead lives of dedication and commitment. Lives not just of success, but also of service, and when called upon, sacrifice. Duvall calls it communities of compassion. Parker Palmer calls it communities of congruence. King called it beloved communities. Beloved community is not pseudo-community, where we do our best to make nice and try to please everybody and avoid anything that might be construed as touchy. Being all things to all people is a favorite Unitarian Universalist trap, one that does not work. A better strategy, instead of trying to be all things to all people, try to figure out what you do well and strive to do it better. Now, part of the reason, I'm talking about King, but you're in an interim period here, and you're soon going to be calling a minister. Not that soon, but a year from now, they'll be seriously engaged. The search committee will have been selected and charged. They'll be reviewing resumes. They'll be interviewing on the phone and then later in person various candidates. And in all that period, you're going to try to figure out, well, who are we? And what do we do well? What's our mission? What's our mojo? Who is us? Okay, so what does UUCIL do well? several things, it seems to me. I mean, you may think I'm just not, but I am paying attention. And I am trying to figure these things out. Who are you guys? What do you do well? Okay, here's what it seems to me you do pretty well. Good worship services, good religious education. Historically, you've been better at religious education than you are today, but a series of short-term directors of religious education enabled the program to kind of flounder, I think it's fair to say. The good news is that you've never reduced funding, plus under the direction of Bob Meese, your religious education is regaining its strength and vitality, and that's important. That religious education, which you seem to know, but historically, for over 130, 40 years, it is the most successful outreach effort that Unitarians or Universalists ever engaged in. People join the church because because their children get proselytized. They say, we can't have that. So where do we go that it offers a religious education program that will help the kids feel the importance of moral education, but it won't beat them up with it. And they discover Unitarian Universalism, or they read about it, they come for the children. Long after the children are off on their own, they're stalwart members. And it happens again and again, and it's because it's the heart of church in a way, and people get that. So you do good worship services, you have a legacy of good religious education, you are a socially active congregation, and you are a generous congregation and financially responsible, where individual members, insofar as I can tell, are now accepting the baton passed on to them by noble predecessors, and with an intention to remain here in the Tri-Valley area and to thrive. I mean, you're grown up about it and able. These are 4 wonderful traditions. Worship and music. So let me be a little more specific about each one. So I said you have good worship services. Now, worship and music go together. They are the heart of what we do as a community. Celebrate life and all that gives life meaning. Joys and sorrows, outreach projects, nurturing the growth of children, inspiring ideas and values. All these we celebrate without dogma and with the informal California ambiance that drew so many of us here to begin with. All this is good. But in my dream, under the direction of your next minister, it gets even better. More celebrative, more generous, and with more young people. But most of all, more outreach. After all, this is Martin Luther King weekend, and beloved community, as King understood and practiced it, puts a high priority on working for justice. Another way this congregation has, in fact, a pretty good record. When it comes to direct services, education, advocacy, witness, and fundraising in-kind contribution opportunities, you have done a lot over the years. Allow me to list some of the many ways that you are deeply and skillfully involved. You may not all know. It's interesting. You're a pretty good social justice church, but you don't brag about it. So let me brag about it a little bit for you. Direct services, volunteer and financial support of Tri-Valley Haven and Open Heart Kitchen, helping provide dinner and other kinds of practical support to people in and around Livermore. Emergency relief efforts through the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, efforts that have included over the decades support for refugees from Central America and Southeast Asia. Partnering with Tri-Valley Community Services to help young adult immigrants brought here as children apply for protected status under DACA. And that is, of course, very much still in the news. Partnering with Asbury Methodist in Livermore in support of a laundry ministry, and Partners for Change in support of neighbors who are struggling. plus efforts on behalf of Habitat for Humanity, Adopt a Creek, and a very vital shawl ministry, and putting together blessing bags for the homeless. That's all just direct services. In the realm of education, offering monthly forums on social justice issues, including prison reform, immigration, waste reduction and recycling, women's health and safety, gun control, healthcare reform, racial and economic inequality, and many others. Also, book club and a community-wide study and periodic community-wide study sessions to increase awareness and encourage skillful action. I was very touched and impressed upon arriving here. Even before I arrived, I heard about this kind of a worship service on July 2nd, which my colleague Dave Sammons got some people bent out of shape about the then current kind of turmoil at the UUA in Boston. And people got bent out of shape, but they didn't just leave it there. They had dialogue groups, and they worked through their feelings, and they resolved to stay the course with your commitment to a more racially sensitive way of being and outreach in the community. I thought that's pretty good, because a lot of churches would just go, I mean, no kidding. And then organizing ballot measure discussions before elections and evaluating election results as they relate to the common good and are informed by our Unitarian Universalist principles. So that's education programming that's been going on for 60 years. 60 years, nonstop, week in and week out. Advocacy, petitions for important causes, advocating for homeless people in response to Livermore's new camping ordinance, and in support of affordable housing. Working on No on 8 efforts in 2008, supporting freedom to marry whomever one loves, and following through on LGBTQ efforts across the board and for 20 years. The last 20 years, I mean, being pretty much out front early on before it was fashionable or chic. Letter writing campaigns and organized visits to legislators' offices. In the realm of witness, attending rallies, marches, and demonstrations, and inviting members to do it together. Rallies, marches, and demonstrations against imperial wars from Vietnam to Iraq twice, in support of LGBT rights and pride, and also immigration reform, and joining the Oakland Women's March and the Livermore March for Science just recently, and being active leaders in Interfaith Interconnect, bringing 14 religious communities together here in this area in support of shared commitment to uplift and betterment throughout the Tri-Valley. From its beginning, over 60 years ago, UUCIL has been connected to many excellent community organizations. Many of you have contributed money and muscle to help empower nearby homeless and working poor people to achieve greater self-sufficiency. By providing support, including shelter, transitional housing, food, job placement, child care, education, and life skills training, you have engaged in each of the 4 types of social justice that I have mentioned and that are noted by activists: direct services, education, advocacy, and witness. Now there's a 5th type of social justice effort, one particularly poignant on a day honoring Dr. Martin Luther King, and that is actions in support of systemic change. Projects of this kind tend to be the most radical, like the efforts here in the 60s in support of integration, fair housing, and equal opportunity. And actions of some of you throughout the 80s calling into question and challenging our government's policy in Central America, policies which led to the violence that sent so many refugees and their children on the road to safety. And they're still in the air. I mean, they just want to negate the El Salvadorian opportunity for safety as refugees here. Now, all the social action projects UUCIL is involved in currently are good and important ministries of this church. And as I said, they're all good. And they're all important. But you can do more. Direct services, education, witness, and advocacy could be augmented with collective work for needed systemic change. Perhaps joining together to sponsor or help sponsor a deserving refugee family, actively supporting Black Lives Matter, maybe with equal support for Blue Lives Matter, all with the idea of finding a good way to help that virtually everyone can get behind and that will really begin to change things and shake things up. Some people perceive a tension between social action and inner reflection, as though one had to choose either one or the other. But it's not an either-or situation. It's both and. Worship and social action go together. Dana McLean Greeley was the first president of the newly merged Unitarians and Universalists when, in early March 1963, he received a telegram from Martin Luther King asking him to come to Selma, Alabama. That telegram was sent when King was in the Birmingham, Alabama jail and was writing his letter from a Birmingham jail. Dr. Greeley then immediately proceeded to call many other ministers across the UUA. Actually, he tried to call every single one, including some newly minted ones, and he didn't accomplish that, but he called 90% of the ministers, inviting them, asking them, and joining them to join him and Dr. King at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. About a third, over a quarter, and almost a third of our members did. And you know, it was interesting. I mean, many of them, they all said, well, I'll preach on it. And so the Santa Monica Church, Ernie Pipes, who's still with us, not as minister, but as minister emeritus. And this I'm challenging you to do. Here's how lay people can really help their ministers. Here's what happened to Ernie Pipes. He'd only been there about 5 years. He felt wet behind the ears, and he was pretty young. And he got that call, and he mentioned it in his sermon, and he said, well, I can't do that because I've got a lot of responsibilities and several meetings that are set up, and the canvas is underway. And during the social hour, 3 or 4 of the members got, the better healed members, and they came over and said, no, you're going. He said, well, I can't go. No, you're going. And he went, and it changed his life, okay? And when there are moments like that, you got to know them, and you got to give your ministers, I'm being told, this is not what you do. What you do is you stand up and go. Dana McLean Greeley gets high marks as an activist, but he was more than an activist only. He believed that worship and social action informed each other, fueled each other, made one another stronger. I want a church, he wrote, that knows what worship means on the one hand, and what social action means on the other hand, and that is tied together by bonds of love in such fashion that the worship is truly communal, and that the social action can be contained and non-divisive. Beloved community is non-divisive and it is properly contained. It welcomes us in all our humanness and brokenness and struggle, helps us acknowledge our humanness and brokenness, and helps us recollect our wholeness as part of something bigger, love, soul force, Gandhi's Satyagraha, God, the community of life, however you conceive it. It does not matter what you call it. The spirit that's at the heart of beloved community is the same spirit that's at the heart of life. The force that through the green stem drives the flower, to use Dylan Thomas's poetic lyrical phrase. The force that through the green stem drives the flower. Worship helps us get in touch with that force. Social action helps us serve it. The two go hand in hand. The times are difficult. We have growing inequity. We have a renewed climate of allowing racism, overt racism, as spoken of from on high. We have climate change, political impasse and vitriol, terrorism, an untested and by many untrusted businessman in the White House, war profiteering across the globe, not to mention gangs and dope and pop culture vulgarity. But we have hope, too, and we have imagination, and the models of good, creative, loving people like Martin Luther King, like Chili Barlow, and many other UUCIL members over the years to remind us of how much we can do when we put differences aside and join our hearts and heads in a shared and noble task. Perhaps we cannot all be Martin Luther Kings or even Chili Barlows, but we can all get in touch with the energy that inspired both of them, love. We can all be dreamers, as Dr. King encouraged, and as many of the heroic justice advocates among us here at UUCIL are likewise encouraging us to be. We can all be dreamers for love and justice. We can all endeavor to do even better the things we are doing well, and to keep working at nurturing beloved community among us and beyond, across our town, our region, our country, and our whole world. So may it be. Amen. Namaste. Shalom. She wants to skip gift of music. Not me. I don't want to. She wants to skip.